PSBA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Well, thank you so much, Lori. As always, you do a great job in managing our Zoom events. I'd like to extend a thank you as well to the board of PSBA, to our outgoing president, Sally Alger, and our incoming president, Belinda. And it's with great pleasure that I have the honor to introduce this afternoon's speaker. For many of you, Rebecca Chamlee needs no introduction. In 2019, Rebecca joined us in Tacoma to present on her work, as well as to offer a 2-day workshop on using botanical contact printing in artist books. I can say that this workshop was a grand success and influenced and inspired so many of our members that now in 225, they're still talking and remembering that wonderful weekend. Her focus on our environment and the natural world not only resonates with our current exhibition of nature and the book, now at the Miller Library at the University of Washington, and that will soon travel to the Bloedel Reserve on Bainbridge Island later this spring, but with our theme of our 2025 exhibition, Field Work, which we'll hear a lot more about in our business meeting. Rebecca is a book artist, printer, writer, and bookbinder who has published innovatively designed letterpress printed limited edition fine press and artist books under the imprint of Pie in the Sky Press. I just love that name, since 1986. Her work is in prominent special and private collections throughout the United States and has been exhibited widely. As a self-taught naturalist and citizen scientist, Rebecca's artist books examine the intersection of her artistic and scientific interests by collecting and cataloging the natural world. Rebecca retired in 2023, but she is still very busy. She was an associate professor at Otis College of Art and Design, where she taught bookbinding, letterpress printing, artist books, and ran the Book Arts minor program for over 20 years. But now she's able to hold workshops at her studio and book arts centers throughout the country. One of her latest works is titled Listen, Notes from the Field. And in her own words, she describes portions of the book. Listen, Notes from the Field is a personal investigation into the sounds of birds, what their vocalizations mean, and how they differ from bird to bird. Utilizing a sit-spot routine allowed the natural world to unfold before my eyes and ears in a way I'd never experienced in the years of exploring trails on foot in a nearby wildland park. In a comfortable spot in nature, I sit, slow down, and observe to discover the wonder in the moment. We are so fortunate to have you, Rebecca, as our annual meeting speaker, and everyone join me in a virtual welcome. Rebecca.
Thank you, Jane. That was so nice. There may be a little bit of dog barking. I hope it's not too disruptive. So I'm going to talk today about my latest book. It's now complete. I'm still finished binding it, but the entire project is called Listen, and there's 2 volumes in a box set. So about 30 years ago, my son and our 2-year-old son, my husband and my 2-year-old son moved out here from downtown LA. This is Simi Valley, California. it's an arid inland valley, and we had been searching for a place to move to for so many years and really wanted to get out of the kind of hectic downtown LA situation. And so we found this, very, it's a tract home, but it's one of those places where you are literally across the street from access to a wildland. And so right across the street from my house, literally I walk out my front door and cross the street, and I'm at the trailhead of a park called Corriganville. And it was a cowboy set, a cowboy ranch, and they filmed many episodes of television, B movies. You probably have seen Corriganville if you've ever watched any old cowboy movies. So this is the draw to this place was this park. And I have a couple dogs, always have a couple dogs. So it's kind of a changing crew over the years. But these are images of Corriganville, and it has these dramatic sandstone boulders. And why am I not shifting here? Okay, maybe if I just click. Here we go. And really rich, dense, this is coastal sage scrub, which is also called soft chaparral. So it's very fragrant, volatile, burns easily and quickly. And lots of these plants require fire in order to reseed. There's also oak woodlands. These are California native coast live oaks. And this is a dog on a sandstone boulder. This dog was Reason. And another thing that's so fabulous about where I live is my studio. We moved into this house. It had this kind of great room, and we never used it. And I got some bindery equipment, and I had a press, moved in with a press. And my husband designed these cabinets. My brother-in-law built them. And I have the most beautiful studio. And here's my press, which you can also see over my shoulder. And I have bindery equipment. It's all here. So as happened to most of us, the pandemic occurred and we were all at home. And I had been, very used to a very active social life. I taught, and everything came grinding to a halt. Of course, we all lived on Zoom. And I started feeding wild birds outside my studio window. So I had something for everybody. This is suet and hummingbird feeder, seed feeder for finches and sparrows. And this is Niger for goldfinches and fresh water. And as often happens with me, when I get kind of into something or an idea has grabbed me, I was very, very into watching these birds out my window. I started to look at it from a number of different points of view. So I'm a very avid sewer, and I started making these little stuffed birds. This one I made for Bonnie Thompson Norman, who I believe is a member. And I don't know if she's here today. And here's a little oak titmouse and a jay. And then during the pandemic, Partners in Print, which is in Seattle, they started offering these Zoom classes called Long Distance Letterpress. And so I watched one with Mary Bruno. And so I took these images of birds and did linoleum reduction prints, which wasn't anything I'd really explored before. And so I started playing around with that, just looking at birds in a variety of ways. And then I bought a long lens for my camera and started shooting photographs of birds out my studio window. So that was I've kind of zipped through it. Here's a hooded oriole female and an oak titmouse. And I really love bathing birds. This is a little pool party of house sparrows and a California towhee. This is an orange crowned warbler and our scrub jays, and then a mourning dove. And I get occasional unusual visitors like this Nuttall woodpecker, and there's another California scrub jay, and a female Allen's hummingbird, a house finch. And it can be kind of like a nature show out there sometimes. Here's a spotted towhee with a very demanding baby. And I'll talk more about juvenile begging later on. But here's you can see this red eye the adult spotted towhees have, that the babies don't have yet. And a California quail, and a bird and a bee. So also, I was doing a lot of Zoom, signing up for Zoom talks. And this is one that I attended through Tree Song Nature Center. And it was presented by Shura Kalzi. And it was an introduction to bird language. And it really sparked a very keen interest in the sounds of birds. And talked about the language of birds, and also introduced me to the idea of developing a sit spot routine. It's kind of a mindful birding technique where you find a place in nature and sit and listen, be quiet and listen, kind of unfocus your eyes and be in the moment and see what you can learn from the birds. So this is also a little quilting design on the side there. Also, Kalsa was a student of John Young's, who wrote this book called What the Robin Knows. And it goes into greater detail about the language of birds and the sit spot idea. And so I was thinking about this book, and it's centered on the idea of finding spots in nature to listen to birds, and also use it as kind of a field journal. And so I looked at a lot of these nature journals for inspiration. And I find these things so beautiful. And then this was my idea because I'm a letterpress printer, and I wanted to make this book in multiples. This is the way that I decided to treat my field notes pages in this book. So another thing is, with the camera, I was getting these incredible images of birds. And this Cooper's hawk was kind of looking at the yard saying, what are all these birds doing here? And so I started working and developing ways of reproducing these photographic images of birds for the book. I developed this technique for printing photographs over the course of about 12 or 13 years. And every book requires kind of a different approach to the way that images are treated. And so this was the process for the first testing of bird images. So I printed the yellow and red. It's a 4-color image. And then the blue, they're from photopolymer plates of the separations that I've made. And then finally adding the black. And you can see the difference of black makes. The image on the left has the black, and the image on the right is previous to the black plate. So everything goes in these journals. I have journals for every project I do. And in them, I have my printing tests. I have the writing that I do, the research that I do. Often I'm giving myself pep talks. And so you can see here, everything ends up in these journals. And if you're a book artist, I highly recommend you take up this kind of idea, because I used to just have stuff scattered all over the place and threw them in a box. But now everything is carefully documented and contained in these journals. So here's some more pages from the journal. And I test these images. I print these images before they end up in the book a number of times, just so that I have them completely figured out. And I test on different kinds of paper. I try with different sorts of ink and work out my binding. And here's ink drawdowns. And here's the title labels that are going to go on the future book and box. And because I'm a letterpress printer, there's a lot of type involved. And this is one of my just most valued possessions. It's a really complete wood type. It's 18 line wood type with lowercase, extra condensed. And here you can see it printed. I like the idea of using type very expressively, and I made a point of doing that with this book. And here I invested in 72-point brand new deep Dean italic, and you can see it printed here with the dove. And then here's a bunch of type that has yet to be put away. And one of my very favorite things about this entire project is the second Z in buzzing. It's just such a beauty. I get really crazy about type. And sometimes you don't have quite enough letters. So I only had 2 lowercase g's. So this is how you deal with that. Set up the third G and printed that so it looked like I had all the type. So here's a little example of some of these 4-color images. This is the title bird for the title page. It's a male Allen's hummingbird. And there's the yellow plate printed on the title page. And then I'm using brighter colors, neon colors for this bird because of the nature of the image. So this is the magenta. You can see it printing on the press. And that's the yellow and the magenta. And then the blue. And you can see how the image kind of comes to life with every pass. And here's the black. And that's the final image. So after, I kid you not, 7 months of printing, and I print, I don't work on the weekends, but I printed every day for 7 months. And then it's very nerve-wracking when you have to trim the sheets down after all that printing work, but it's part of the process. Just kind of take a deep breath. And then I start working on the production of the book. So I use a sewing frame when I had this edition is 25 copies. So I can sew 10 at a time on the sewing frame. And I love this Rami tape. I don't know if any of you that do case binding have tried it rather than linen tapes. It's very strong. It virtually disappears into the binding. You can't see it on the under the end sheets. And then this is sewing the second volume, which is about corvids, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. And then making the box. I have a laser cutter and I use that for cutting out all my box parts, which speeds things up and makes everything exactly the same. And so this is I'm just going to show you the box, kind of the completed project. So the entire project is called Listen. And inside the box is the first volume, which is Listen to the Corvids. And then the second book, which is the main book, is Listen Notes from the Field. And then there's a little prize inside. It's an Audubon bird call. So here's the book. Now I'm going to go through it and kind of explain to you the way the idea developed and how it was realized in the final book. So this is about the sit spot. So as I said, it's a practice used in a mindful birding activity where you go into nature. You can even do it on the, your back porch if you have access to listen to birds. I happen to have this beautiful wildland park across the street. And so I was adopting a sit spot routine in various parts of the park. And so this talks about a lot of people, and it's kind of recommended that you find one spot and you return to your spot day after day. However, I really wanted to, because there's different habitats in my my local area, I really wanted to experience the different vocalizations of birds in different parts of the park. So I didn't stay in one place. So the language of birds, and this is when I was first introduced with that talk from Tree Song, is bird song, which is the most common, what we attribute most to the sounds of birds, is listening to them sing. And when birds are singing, they're most relaxed. Oftentimes it's mainly male birds, but not always, that do the singing. And then companion calls, and that it's like, I'm here, I'm over here. They're kind of communicating their location with each other. And again, the birds are very relaxed during this. And then juvenile begging, like you saw with the spotted towhee, baby birds will make a lot of noise and posturing in order to get the attention of their parents and try to get the most food. The fourth vocalization is territorial aggression, which is mainly bird on bird aggression, where birds are trying to establish and keep their territories and food source. And then finally, alarm sounds, which are birds are highly aggravated and they're frightened, and often it'll be one warning note, very loud and intense. So through this, I wanted to kind of highlight each of the different kinds of vocalizations within my kind of sit, spot, and field note routine. So here we go. Also, as I talked about, there's various habitats in my area, the soft chaparral, and there's different birds that frequent each of these different kinds of habitats. The oak woodland, there's a lot of woodpeckers, and we have acorn woodpeckers in my area, very raucous, noisy birds, very communal, and then the riparian woodland, and that's usually birds that eat insects, are found in kind of wet areas. And so I was looking at the various habitats plus the birds and the vocalizations that you could find in these spots. And this is how I kept my notes in. Have you ever seen, I'm sure you guys have all seen field notes, and they have this wonderful collection of letterpress printed covers. So I went through a whole pack of those over the course of my note taking. And so this is one of my favorite sit spots. It's in a little area where there's a bunch of very old California, they're coastal live oaks. And here is the field note spread. And so what I kept track of was the location, GPS coordinates, the weather, the time, what sort of habitat it was, what kind of plants I saw. So you can see there's a kind of a background with the coast live oaks, and then the various plants that you can find underneath these trees in the understory, the clustering tarweed and Italian thistles and poison oak, of course. And then the birds that I heard. And I got to the point where I could identify all these birds, but I learned how to identify them with an app called Merlin. And they have a sound feature where you can identify birdsong. So for, my heart's desire was to be able to hear a bird and be able to tell you exactly who it was that did that. And it took some study and using the app until I finally became really confident that I could identify all my local birds. And then notes, this note is kind of highlighting the bird language of song. And I was sitting under these oak trees listening to being serenaded by an oak titmouse. And then here it is, an oak titmouse. And I also enjoy typographically playing with mnemonics or the sound, the making sound into words. And so it's fun to play with the type. And this is another spread from the song portion of the book, and talks about how not all birds sing like crows. They're making a lot of noise, but they're not necessarily singing. And this is another spot. I was underneath some trees, and I was primarily watching and listening to swifts. They're white-throated swifts, and they live and nest in these sandstone formations. And they zip around making it's almost like echolocation, because they're zipping around looking for insects, and there's a lot of them. So I was listening and watching the swifts when I noticed these owlets in this tree. So here they are. There were 4 of them, and this was the second year. These are great horned owls. The second year that this pair had these baby birds. So they start out in the sandstone boulders. They have the nest up there, and then as the babies grow, they fledge, and then they land in the tree, and they're still dependent upon their parents for quite a few months. And so this is the field note spread for that, talking about listening to the swifts and then getting sight of the baby owls. And here's so this ended up falling under the category of call, because I was listening to the swifts call. And here's another very common call. California quails, they will, if the covey disperses in some way, and oftentimes I would surprise them when I would be walking, a sentry will find a high spot and start calling this, you hear people call it Chicago, but I kind of interpreted it a slightly different way because I couldn't hear Chicago. And they call and call and call until the entire covey comes back together. And here's another spread for call. And this sit spot, it's just so beautiful. And I was kind of sitting down low in the leaf litter, and I got sight and heard these acorn woodpeckers were just going crazy because there was a eastern red squirrel trying to invade their acorn woodpeckers will have a granary tree where they create holes and store acorns. And the squirrel was after their cache. And so they really made quite a fuss and drove the squirrel away. So that was for territorial aggression. And one of the more aggressive birds that I see in my yard are male hummingbirds. So they are, they're sweet little tiny birds that you can't imagine how aggressive they are. They just dive bomb each other, and they're zipping around the yard. And so they are featured in territorial aggression. And this spot, this is laurel sumac, and you can also see some milkweed in the foreground. And within these shrubs, I could hear and then catch a little sight of fledgling California scrub jays that were harassing their parents trying to be fed. And so this is the spread for that. And here is a young California scrub jay looking they look a little ratty until they completely feather out for juvenile begging. And this spot, this is very common in my area, in the open areas where you can see a lot of soft chaparral. And I was listening to little birds, like lesser goldfinches and wren tits that were there were so many of them, and they were deep in the sage scrub looking for insects, eating seeds. And then suddenly I heard a loud call and all the birds disappeared. And then just a moment later, I'd look up and I could see 3 circling red-tailed hawks, and then their distinctive scream. So the alarm sound, and everybody hid. Another kind of alarm sound is when a number of mourning doves in particular take off. There's a sound called a wing whistle, and it's one of my favorite bird sounds. And it also is it's an indication of alarm because they take off together. And so there's what normally was a seasonal creek. For the last 2 years, it's run year round. And so I did a spread about that, about the riparian birds. And then another location where I could hear wrens. So we have Buick's wrens, and we also have California canyon wrens. And you can hear them. It's kind of almost like a call and response between the 2 different species of wrens. And finally, the white-crowned sparrow. The song of the white-crowned sparrow, and I know you guys get them, but they come here for the winter, and they're all over my yard presently. When I first hear the song of the white-crowned sparrow, I know that summer is almost over and that winter is on the way. And this is the final page, the conclusion of the book. And because the 5 vocalization, main voices of birds that I described are typical to songbirds. John Young, the writer of What the Robin Knows, he had something called the corvid disclaimer, because although they're perching birds, like songbirds, they do not obey or follow any of the songbirds' vocalizations. In some ways, I read a scientific paper trying to identify the meaning of crow sounds, and they really weren't able to draw very many conclusions. Another thing I read, a guy was kind of like, 1 caw means this, 2 caws mean this. So everybody is a little bit baffled by what they're talking about. But when you watch crows and you hear them, it's the context that you have to look at, because it's what they're responding to, not necessarily what the sound means. And then jays are another corvid, and they make a lot of noise. They are they scare all the little birds away and dominate the feeders when they come along. And as in all my projects, I do make individual prints. So these are some of the prints that can be purchased individually from the book. And finally, any of you are letterpress printers out there, this is my apron. And my life is pretty much about make ready.
The book is absolutely exquisite and
Oh,
beautiful,
thank you.
but what has also resonated with me as I read about your own work and the thought process that went into this book was sort of the whole awareness of the sit spot and how relevant that is to our times right now. I think that so many of us are finding that mindful process to connect with nature, to improve our well-being and to increase our observational skills and to just be aware of the world around us is so meaningful. And I really admire and appreciate you bringing that to the book. It's so important. I'm sure there are many questions and comments, but I'm curious, do you feel like you're going to take this sit spot to other areas or to wildlife, other wildlife in the area? You're so engaged with the environment. Do you have future plans?
Well, I walk my dogs every day, and I went for a walk this morning, and I was walking through a favorite area and realized I hadn't really sat for a while. And so just this morning I sat and just listened just for a little, just to reconnect. Because it really is, I have walked all over this area for almost 30 years. And it's such a different experience of the environment, of the landscape, when you actually stop and sit and open yourself up to the possibilities, because you just don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, I did that this morning.
Beautiful process. Well, we have a lot of positive and wonderful remarks coming in from everyone. Gorgeous, beautiful, thank you, wonderful project, gorgeous photographs, amazing work. How long do you sit was one of the questions.
Well, the recommendation is to sit for at least 20 minutes, because that is kind of how much long it takes to really relax, really let go. And I try to do a thing where I kind of unfocus my vision, because if you it opens your vision up to catching things in your provision, you know what I'm trying to say. And so 20 minutes is really kind of a minimum, I would say.
There's a question here about how were your background images made in the book in terms of just your process, a little bit of the process of the book, at the actual making of the pages.
Okay. They came from photographs, and I wanted to print, a suggestion of the kind of environment. So they were, the photographs were made into bitmap images, if that means anything to you, and printed very lightly in the background. What I found, if you want to hear about technical printing stuff, is that with all the ink on the paper, typically what I do is I print the black type last. And I was finding that by doing that, my ink was spreading on the type. So for the first time, I tried printing the black type first and then printed everything else on top of it and had a much better result.
Spectacularly beautiful results. An interesting question from one of our members. How did you determine your sit spot? And do you interact or feed the birds?
I feed wild birds in my backyard.
Okay.
I don't feed birds out in the wild. A lot of people put a lot of stuff out there. I found baked potatoes, and people thinking they're doing a good thing, which actually my dogs want to eat. But what was the original question?
How did you come? Did you just
That finding the spots.
finding the spots? I guess
Well,
if you've been walking that area for so long,
I'm
yeah,
really familiar with it. And what I was looking for were, first of all, comfortable places to sit, so that I wasn't like sitting on a bunch of, I'm trying to not trample the plants. And the areas that I chose were really rich with a variety of birds that would be there and activity from various wildlife. And in the warmer months, if it's shady, that's a plus. But I'm so familiar with this area. It's an extension of my home.
sure. Before we started the meeting, we had a short conversation about the climate and the environment and the impact of the fires in Southern California. Have you experienced that in your environment? And
Yeah,
has that affected the way you approach your work?
it has. In this time, the tragedy that happened a few weeks ago didn't touch us, although it was very windy, and Edison does turn our electricity off whenever it's windy. So that's kind of, we're sort of reminded by that, of the dangers. California, we probably shouldn't even live here in many of these places, because the environment can be very hostile. It's prone to drought and high winds. And we personally have been evacuated twice, and with fires coming so close, it is truly frightening. And when it's over, my park has been completely scorched several times, and which will fill you with sadness. But then you have the opportunity to watch, to really see regrowth and regeneration happen before your eyes. It's these plants are so made for this environment. They just, it's very hard to burn down an oak tree. They just can manage it. And a lot of plants, like I mentioned, they require fire and smoke and ash in order to germinate. And just to watch the way that how hardy and this land can be, because it can be scorched, and then it'll start to rain, and then a couple months later it does take sometimes years for some of these habitats to completely return, but it's like miraculous what can happen after fire here.
Thank you. There were a few questions about the type of paper that you've been using. Is that paper that you make yourself? Can you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
your selection of materials?
Yeah, paper is really important to me and my practice. And I decided quite a long time ago, and after trying to make paper, that I would leave paper making to professionals. I do everything else. I set the type, I print it, I design it, I bind them, I write them, make the images and all that. So, I don't have to make paper when there's people that can make beautiful paper. This book had the field notes volume, the 72-page smaller orange book, is entirely printed on Zircon Nitigen and Zircon text wove, which has those are two of my favorite papers. Sadly, the Zircon mill a few years ago decided to close after the mill was damaged by flooding in Germany, and they are no longer making paper. So kind of right now, a big talk amongst letterpress book artists is, what paper are we going to use? So I'm this book was the last of my
Last of your stash.
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes for questions, and I want to ask those of you on the call, if you'd like to unmute and ask a question yourself, that's great. But Rebecca, I'm just going to close with one question that you might think is a little silly, but how did you decide the name of your press? I always find it interesting. So Pie in the
Okay.
Sky Press.
Okay. So I went to art school in the early 80s at Otis and was introduced to letterpress printing really early on. And to say it changed my life is, I set my name, put it in a Vandercook and printed it, and the rest is history. I mean, really, I knew at that moment, this is what I wanted to do. So as I was learning about letterpress printing, there's a term called pie, which is if you happen to spill your type, you could not, you could drop an entire case of type, you could drop a galley, or any way that you will drop or disturb type is called a pie. And so I learned that term. And so this is kind of a long answer, but when I was a kid, my parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, they all had these music nights, and they made instruments. They did kind of root music, bluegrass and country music. And one of the songs that I remember from when I was a little kid was, it's called The Preacher and the Slave. And the refrain is, "You get pie in the sky when you die." And that really always captured my imagination. So when I learned the term pie, there you go. That's
Perfect.
how the press, yeah.
I want to thank you again. It's just been a marvelous conversation, and your work is so stunning and inspiring. For those of you on the call, if you want to unmute and ask a question, we have about 5 minutes. If not, I know Rebecca will be looking at the chat and be able to respond to some of those specific questions.
Somebody here asks about the layout of the book, and a lot of thought goes into that. And it takes, these projects my projects always take 2 years, because just this, I allow myself the luxury of developing them slowly. I use InDesign to design all my books because I learned how to do it. And I'm always trying to make the process of going through the book kind of a journey. And I also like it to circle back to the beginning. And if it starts with the idea that I hear birds everywhere, and it also ends with that idea. So organizing a book, it just takes time, and then when you get it right, you know it.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of everyone that you definitely got it right with this book.
Thanks.
And I
Thanks.
want to thank you, and I hope that perhaps we'll see you up here in the Pacific Northwest in the near future.
Well, I have
That
friends
would be
up there.
great.
Yeah, that would be
Thank
great.
you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break and resume our meeting at 2:00. Rebecca, you're welcome to stay. I hope so. And thank you, everyone, for your attention. Rebecca, thank you for inspiring us today.
Thank you for inviting me. This is really a pleasure.
Thank you.